afternoon, evening, whatever it is. It's lovely that the evenings are getting lighter. So this is going to be a session looking at appropriateness within GCSE stats. We're going to look at where it sits within the spec, why we've decided that this would be a good idea, some of the key ideas and issues that have come out, primarily looking at last summer's papers, but based on the trends over the last few series since the new spec of the GCSE statistics came out. And then hopefully share some ideas, or maybe not necessarily resources, but some of the key things that we need, teaching points. Right, so what is appropriateness? If we think about what it is in real life, it's about it being suitable or right for a particular situation or occasion. That's one of the online definitions. Interestingly, I tried to find out about when it was first used, probably nearly 400 years ago. But I would talk to students about what it means. So this is a classic tier 2 words, really, when we talk about those literacy skills across the curriculum. So it's not got its own meaning in terms of maths. So something like an expression would be a tier 3 word where it's got its own meaning within maths. But it does have I wouldn't say an explicit meaning within statistics, but it means we have to do something about it. We have to deal with it slightly different. So that's what it is. Now I will talk to students about what's it mean to be appropriate, not the other word, which is appropriate, when you but they both stem from the same, their etymology is the same. It's quite an interesting thing. I lost about 40 minutes on the weekend looking at the etymology, I think etymology is the word, of appropriate and appropriateness. Fascinating stuff, looking at roots, word roots. But why did we choose to look at appropriate? It comes from a lot of the examiner's report, having done the national feedback from every summer. Appropriateness and justifying the use of certain things and assessing the use of certain things has come up as a weakness for us. Personally, I'm also interested because AO2, reasoning and justifying at GCSE and being able to verbalise that is something that I know personally my school needs to improve. So written communication. And so that's why we chose it, just based on, and part of it is, in order for these, and you guys listening, you want to feel that you're getting something from these sessions. And I think as mathematicians, yeah, there's that great feel-good feeling that you get something from it. But I also, being I'm very black and white in that I want to have something to see if we can measure the impact of it. So being able to go back and look at past performance, which I'm going to do in a minute to show you some of it, the past performance of appropriateness questions. But it sits within the spec as, whilst it does say AO1, using appropriate terminology, it's not really assessing. So we're talking about AO2 and AO3 for GCSE stats. Totally different type of assessment objectives than the GCSE maths, so they are worth looking at. Where we're assessing the appropriateness of certain methodologies and conclusions. And then AO3 is assessing it with the application of the SEC, the Statistical Inquiry Cycle. So that's where it sits within the spec. But what is interesting is that whilst we can look at different assessment objectives for the GCSE, I wanted to be a bit more explicit, because when we had this session in mind, we wanted it to be about those, not choosing appropriate methods, about assessing appropriateness. So we were being very narrow in our selection. And so I went through last summer's papers, and you can just see where the assessment's there. So I went through last summer's paper, looking and picking out all the questions where things were appropriateness. And so if you look here for foundation paper 1 and 2, you can see there that the appropriateness questions, the mean percentage, there was 9 marks, so about 10%. So we're not talking about massive impact, but it's still 9 marks. But the mean percentage on those questions was only 37% compared with 46% within the paper. Similarly, there was 13 marks available, and the students only gained 23% compared with 34%. And the intention is that following next summer's exams, it can be something that we can measure to see whether or not the CPD we're providing through these sessions is impactful. We know it's a little bit, it's a little bit wide range in there, but it's going to give us something to measure. And then I've done the same, but with higher as well. But I'm really interested, just think to yourself, would you expect the discrepancy between appropriateness questions and the overall mean to be less or more than foundation students? I know what my initial reaction would have been before I seen it. So when we look at the higher, there is very little in the paper 1, probably because there's only 8 marks. But as the marks that are available increase, there was an 18% discrepancy, but it's still not as wide as on foundation. And I think that's the nature of students. There is no getting away from it, that you do have to have relatively decent literacy skills and being able to communicate and get those thoughts over in a written form. That was the phrase I was trying to think of, in a written form. So that's why we wanted to look at it, because we could find something that's measurable. It was something that the examiner's report showed that was a weakness for us. So we could look and see that we're actually going to make an impact. So hence the reason why we looked at it. So we're going to have a look at some of the questions, and I'm then going to go through some of the key ideas that that came out of them, to try to reinforce those messages in your teaching. We'll also look explicitly at the mark scheme, and also where some of the wording of the questions. So when we look at the foundation paper 1, I'm not going to go into lots of detail in terms of how they performed. It's more about the pedagogy that comes out of this now, is what can we take back to the classroom. So this question, let's pull the mark scheme up. You can see that there was a time years ago where I would have said, look, whatever happens, even if you have an absolute, your brain implodes when you're sat there and you forget everything, you forget your name, answer the question. So if it's asking you, is it appropriate? You write, it is not appropriate, or it is appropriate, followed by your reason. And even if you don't get a reason, there's a chance that you might get 1 mark for drawing a conclusion. That still stands for, but not for every question. That is, you have to go into the mark scheme and have a look at it. So what I'm saying to my students, it certainly wouldn't stop me doing that, because I'm not going to then teach them, oh, in this situation, don't do it. In that situation, you do it. So there's nothing to lose by still, and I know it's easier said than done for some groups of students, about, we want you to draw that conclusion, because lots of students on this question failed to draw the conclusion and make the ultimate decision. So whether it's through sentence starters of, you draw your conclusion first and to say it is appropriate, it's not appropriate, or it is or it's not, because. And then there's no danger that they can forget to draw that conclusion. So that's one thing that's making me think about how I approach those kind of questions with groups of students, is the order in which, do they discuss it first or do they make their decision first? And I think that's something I've still got to get my head around, and I know that my philosophy has always been within my teaching is that I'd rather go for some marks than no marks. And I know that sounds common sense, but there is some rationale there. So in my head, I'm thinking I need to reinforce the message that we draw conclusions first, then we talk about reasons. Almost that's got to become my new mantra: conclusions, then reasons, conclusions, then reasons. So that was the one thing there. When you think about it, when you look at this question, this was looking at the appropriateness of her methodology to use it to estimate. So appropriateness covers appropriate methods, appropriate calculations, appropriate conclusions. It's across the board. It's not one thing, which is what I'm trying to cover. So it will cover lots of teaching points. I'd be interested to know what, in terms of whether or not any of you do conclusions, reasons, or reasons and conclusions. So then the next one was the appropriateness of using a method. So the appropriateness of using multiple bar charts. Yeah, so on this question, again, too many students were not making that final conclusion, even though the command line says comment on whether or not it is appropriate. So you'd almost think, okay, so I'm going to comment on it's appropriate and then justify why I'm making that decision. And I think that's a key theme that comes through. Then this is an assessment of a conclusion. So when we look again, looking at the mark scheme, so just need to move something at that box out of the way. So that one there was asking to comment whether a conclusion was appropriate and then giving a reason. So you can see there that, and again, understanding the mark scheme, that saying Carol's conclusion is appropriate or she's correct was dependent on giving the reasons. So it is important that they're giving the reasons. Lots of students on this, it was understanding, and I think this is an understanding of relative or misunderstanding of relative frequency and probability. But again, there was one of the things that came through right loud and clear is about just have a go, get something down. But my thing to reinforce with students is at least you tried by, even if you messed up the rest of the question, your conclusion was appropriate because, and I think that's going to be the key message from people, is you draw your conclusions first. Right, next question, we're looking at foundation paper 1, question 6, giving reasons. So this one, again, you're not being asked to say whether it's appropriate or not appropriate. There's almost a theme coming through that one of the resources I attempted to look at doing was almost saying whether it's appropriate or not. So it was using more of that phrasing. So on the previous question, if I go back up to that previous question, that one, Carol's conclusion is not appropriate. Or Carol's conclusion is appropriate, give a reason why. So you're almost saying that it's appropriate. Well, you are saying it's appropriate. And that's one of the things that I might add in, because we're doing another session about extended answers. And on those extended answers where it's appropriate for me to do so, I might make a note. I'm going to ask Amy. Amy, can you remind me to do that? Looking at a previous paper, it won't be last summer's, it'll be previous to that, where we add all of those questions for the appropriateness, saying whether it is or isn't appropriate, asking for reasons. So almost within the teaching, you're giving them, you're saying it's just give us the reasons. I'm not interested in the yes or no. Is it appropriate? I'm really interested in the reasons. So that becomes the focus. And I think that would be really useful for us all. Sometimes you have these brainwaves when you're mid-flow. Foundation paper question 1, like I said, this is the one where it's giving a reason why. You're already told it's appropriate. This was really well answered. So there is a suggestion that once students know if it is suitable or not suitable, they can then give the reasons. It's the assessment of whether it is or isn't that for some scenarios could be the issue. So maybe taking away that decision for some students might provide a little bit of scaffolding. Again, I haven't got all the answers. I am, like you, always looking to learn though. Again, the frequency polygon, this was a crossover question, so a little bit of a mixed bag, because when we look at it on foundation, it was really rare to see why it was suitable. However, on higher, it was still less answered than the other parts of the question, but not as bad as foundation. You'd expect that, so there's no great shakes there. But what students on foundation were more likely to do was to offer an alternative diagram rather than answer the question as to why it wouldn't be appropriate or it would be appropriate. So yeah, the mixed bag on that one on higher and foundation again, starting the sentences and enforcing the idea that draw your conclusions first, then give reasons. The idea of this being a discussion, discuss whether or not it would be appropriate to use. Very few students were able to give 2 sides of an argument. And very few also recognised that because of the large frequency variation, 199 to 1, frequency polygons might not be suitable. And I think that's quite a difficult one when it comes to something like a frequency polygon, as to looking at the examples and what I call non-examples, and I don't know if that's a phrase, that you use within your teaching. So when it comes to why am I using a bar chart for this topic, or why am I using cumulative frequency, or why am I using this? Would it work for a frequency table made up of colours? No, a cumulative frequency wouldn't. I'm coming up with it off the top of my head. And almost having that discussion as part of why am I using this diagram? Because I know I've fallen into that trap where I go, right, here's a frequency table. We can see the data's grouped. It's asking us for cumulative frequency. A cumulative means we accumulate. So that means it must be a cumulative frequency diagram. But rather than discuss, or I might talk about why we use it, because it's group data. But rather than, I would spend very little time talking about what we wouldn't use. And I know that's something that will help me. It's just made me reflect about, oh, we use a time series graph in this situation. Well, when wouldn't we use it? Or what else would be suitable? I don't have a lot of those discussions. It's almost very much, this is when we use it, not when we don't use it. So yeah, it's just really interesting, got me thinking about examples and non-examples. What am I going to pull into when I'm teaching pie chart? It's almost every representation of data. Why have I chosen to represent it as a pie chart? Why didn't I choose to do a bar chart? Or could I? Oh, I could have used it for a bar chart in that situation. Why haven't I done a time? Oh, there's no time on it. Even the extreme examples that to us as teachers, and we have to remember we're the experts, not the novices, seems like second nature. That sometimes you have to state the obvious to students. And I always, when people ask me about my not pedagogy, but theory, the principles on which I've based my teaching is that when it comes to introducing a topic, I assume they know nothing. And in fact, if it was on a scale of me teaching a topic from 0 to 10, I start at -3. So I will look to what's their prior knowledge. I'm gonna check they know that before I launch into a topic, and then come a cropper, because you find that there's something that they don't understand that's a prerequisite. So that was got me thinking. Higher paper 1, question 5, when we look at it, give 2 reasons why it may not be appropriate. So again, students on these kind of questions, when they are given the guides, that's not the word I'm thinking of, when they're given, it's guidance. It's not appropriate. They have that decision's taken in their hands. That almost make a decision. That little bit of panic for some students is taken out their hands. And almost all students were able to give at least one reason. The second reason, sometimes not so well, and sometimes a little bit woolly. But the fact is that it was answered well, which again supports my hypothesis, my theory that I do think telling them whether it's appropriate or not appropriate in class and just focusing on the reasons. It's that old adage, isn't it? You get what you measure. If we're focusing on the reasons should get better. Again, on the higher tier, part B asked why it's, again, telling them it's not appropriate. It's saying, and it would have been fascinating, and maybe this is something I can go and have a look at, is that kind of question in the past, is this, if it is, have we had one where it was, is this appropriate, and how that performs, rather than giving a reason. It's very leading, it's saying, explain why it's not appropriate. It was well answered. Again, you'd expect that. And then, but they found the discussion around pie charts being appropriate, again, a little bit tougher. And is that because it's a topic that needs explicitly teaching, especially comparative pie charts, and because it's not on the maths GCSE? But again, having that discussion about why would we use this? When wouldn't we use this? And the idea that you're giving advice, what does that look like? Modeling the answers to them. There is a point where you go, actually, I'm going to go for the big hitting questions. Have we seen what advice before? Very rarely. I'm not saying we haven't, because I haven't done that analysis, so don't take that as gospel. And how much am I really going to focus on? How do we answer a what advice question? But it is asking about it was looking for when the answer scheme on that one was looking for some kind of decisions about the appropriateness of it, even though it didn't explicitly mention they are appropriate, hence the reason why it's been highlighted. The most complete answers on that, interestingly, acknowledge strengths in both suggestions, but then chose one option as the better one. And it wasn't necessarily asking them to do that, but again, it might be something that they're used to doing in English or other written subjects where they have that discussion kind of thing where they offer both sides of the argument and then draw their conclusion. But there's definitely a difference between higher and foundation. Then foundation paper 2, when we look, this was surprising about whether and which of the averages would be more appropriate. Because when we look at part C, but it was lots of flexibility on the marks that were awarded, so that has to be taken into account. So parts C, D, and E were all marked together, because there was lots of follow-through marks on this. But again, made me think about not just, oh, why would we use the, you know, that you usually get to draw a table, advantages and disadvantages of using different averages. But I've done very little in terms of, oh, why would we not use the median in this case? So yeah, it just got me thinking, I think. Well, I know. Again, coming up with those non-examples in my teaching about when we don't use them, or because it's not just the disadvantages. And I know you can't consider every situation, but there's sometimes when I think, would I have used that in my teaching? And I know we're not expected to cover every scenario. But there's some that I go, oh, I missed a trick there. I missed using that as one of the things for them to work through. I don't know, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. Question 5 on foundation was what's called an extended response. This came under the AO3 extended, the statistical inquiry cycle. So it was all about data collection, calculation, and the diagrams. And it does say for calculations, discuss whether they're appropriate. It's an extended response. I'm not going to spend lots of time on it because we're going to look at extended response at a later session. But there was some things, again, I think this is a skill that needs to be explicitly taught to students. We need to give them the structure as to how to discuss. What does a discussion mean? I do have to say for 6 marks in a discussion, there wasn't a great deal of space there, especially if you've got handwriting like mine. But there is a skill to it. There's a certain set of steps to go through. And that takes us explicitly, even down to some students being told, okay, you've been told to discuss the 3 parts, split your page into 3. And how much they needed to write. It is unusual for students get a little bit, they don't particularly like, my students particularly don't like writing lots of text. So I'm not going to dwell on how we get better at that, because we're going to look at those extended response questions in another session. And what we have done for them is I'm partway producing an adapted paper that I've used where I'm giving them the sentence starters and it's filling the gaps answers as much as possible, and then with the other tweak that I've just said about telling them that it's appropriate or not appropriate, given with a focus more on reasons. I think that would be really useful resource for us all for the summer. So I'm not going to dwell on extended response because it is something else that we're going to look at. Foundation paper 2, question 7. Again, it's about discussing or whether a method is appropriate, not choosing an appropriate method. And they're, again, two different things. There's sometimes you're having to choose the appropriate things, and sometimes you're having to, in this case, discussing whether or not the method that was used by somebody was appropriate. And that's more like what we're going to get, or what like we get. Right, this one particularly. So again, important we get that what we need to do is part of our normal practice and sometimes what happens in a series. So were you to look at this exam series in isolation, as maybe you're new to the qualification, it was allowed that the students could write, table should include more options, or the option other should be included as 2 separate marks. But that wouldn't be the usual practice. So don't think that that's the usual practice going forwards. And usually it would have only scored 1 mark, and that was detailed in the examiner's report. I just want to make that clear in terms of if you're looking at the mark scheme and you can end up with an argument with somebody saying, but that's what we did here. Each exam series does have slightly different, not always, but some exam series have slightly different decisions that are made. But again, most people made the incorrect response that there wasn't enough room for tallies. And then the part C, whilst explicitly saying it's not about appropriate, they were still looking for a comment about appropriateness in terms of whether or not a stem and leaf was appropriate. So again, having those decisions and those non-examples. So would I use stem and leaf for this group of data, this list of data? No, because it might be a list of colours. Doesn't make any sense. And again, I'm talking about going. It's almost like the silliest examples you can imagine. There's a couple of really nice. If you go back to the old standards packs, there's some really great averages questions. Averages at what am I thinking of? Words, resources. Then foundation paper 2, question 8, looking as to whether or not a scatter graph was appropriate. We were really looking for it to be because the data's bivariate, or it shows a relationship between 2 varies. That should be well answered by everybody. Again, I'm not talking about it being chalk and talk. We use this because the data's bivariate. It should be, when wouldn't we use it? I couldn't use it for this group of data. And I know some of you out there will have some great ideas. And if I think it gets mentioned at the end, but if you do have any great resources that are that you've made or that you're prepared to share with people, the Facebook page for stats teachers starting to get a little bit of traction would be brilliant, especially if we could share. And the more we share, the stronger, the better we get at it. So again, it's that discussion. It's not even a discussion. It's just you've been told it's appropriate, relatively well answered. Again, foundation paper 2, question 9. It's not appropriate. Give a reason why. those are the things that the students get more than making the decision. So there is almost not an instant win. I'm not going to make that claim. There's almost a win for some students about you make your decision, then you give your reasons. You assess whether it's appropriate, then you make your reasons. And for some students, that will shift them. Again, give a reason why it is appropriate. Higher and foundation. So the assumption is it's appropriate. I need to give reasons. They are so much better answered. And maybe we think about when we're phrasing these questions. I've stood in front of classes where you ask them the question. So I need you to tell me, is it appropriate to do this? And it's like tumbleweed going down the centre of the classroom, and you think you could be speaking, you could be an alien, and it's almost like you're speaking a different language. And it's really got me thinking about, okay, so if I'd made that decision, so okay, guys, I'm telling you it's inappropriate to do this, or it's not appropriate to use this diagram. Why? Give me a reason. And all of a sudden they'll start popping up around the room, because you're taking that. It's almost like a fight or flight reaction for some students. Oh my God, I've got to make a decision. I could quite happily tell you why I'm making that decision, but in that moment of, and that seems to be coming through. Whereas something like higher paper 2 question 5, when we're looking at this, comment on the appropriateness. Again, they've got to make that decision. It is appropriate or it's not appropriate. And they're the ones that we appear to be struggling with. So maybe we need to give them a little bit of a helping hand. It's like a little bit of a step up, isn't it? And then especially more so foundation students than higher students, I have to say. But it's definitely a key message to take away from this, that maybe we take away the decision in the short term, and then as the time goes on, we start forcing them to make decisions. This one, it's almost, there's only one decision to be made here. They had to calculate geometric mean. There wasn't a great deal else they could have done with it. So, and even though it says it's, so I'm not really taking the class in this as appropriateness. The appropriateness I thought about when I put this together was, it was about assessing appropriateness, not necessarily calculate it, choosing there really isn't a great deal of choice as to what was going on there. But this one particularly did prove to be challenging for students. And I think it's not because they didn't know which one to choose. I think it genuinely will be a topic that doesn't get a great deal of coverage just because of time. But I might be wrong. It might be that I'm having not taught a great deal of higher students, if I'm brutally honest. But it wasn't the intention of this session. This was about assessing appropriateness. So then we got higher paper 2 question 8. Just conscious, I don't want you to not answer your questions. Again, it was a long form answer talking about, and we're going to look at those in the future session, as to trying to give you a structure to use with students. So that was part of the AO3, the data collection, statistical inquiry cycle. Is data's, and again, you can see this higher paper 2 question 9, having to make that decision, but making it, and then why, what's your reason? Not so well answered, so that, were I to rephrase that with students, we're going to hopefully produce that. It would be, right, Dina's suggestion is not appropriate, tell me why. Why is that not the thing to do? So rephrase the questions. I'm telling you it's not appropriate, give me a reason. And then in terms of So when you compare, and this sums it up for me, when you compare the two parts here, one is saying, is it appropriate, asking you to make a decision. Oh no, they're both, is it appropriate, D and E, to use different things. I was just looking at the comments there. And there was a little bit of confusion for both of those, specifically the last one, but I think that's content. Right, so in terms of what can we learn from it, use the word, talk about it, is it appropriate? And I mean lots, wherever you can. Talk about what it means. Basically, use it lots. The one there is use it with non-examples. Try to link in more reasons why you wouldn't use things than why you would. So you demonstrate it. What's coming through is that students are very good at the doing part of statistics. By that I mean the calculations, and we need to, one of the things we need to work on is their ability to verbalize what they're doing, why they're doing it. And again, that's practice. It is, all of it is learning, all of it is comes through practice. And if we can demonstrate when we're getting them to do producing the diagrams, could you tell me why I couldn't use a pie chart in this situation? Or here's a group of data, I want you to draw me a bar chart, and it being complete and utter nonsense and impossible. Well, I can't because it's not that kind of data. Okay, I want you to produce a scatter graph. Well, what am I going to plot? What's my two variables? And then they'll start thinking, oh, actually, these are what I need. So that's what I mean by non-examples and examples, if I'm hoping that makes sense. And then in terms of resources, we've got all the stuff on the Emporium. There will be something that we're going to look at with the next session that we do, looking at extended answers. Oh, I've gone up downwards. So don't forget to keep an eye on that statistics. That is something that is coming out very soon. At some point, Amy will be able to put a date on, which is some shadow papers. And they look, based on last summer, they look really good. Right, so look at, and I've mentioned this at the last session about the textbook. You don't need to buy the textbook to do the course, but it is worth having a textbook, even if it's, I'm not talking necessarily that textbook. You don't need, there's resources out there. There is nothing that you need to buy in order to deliver the course. But what I have found, even if for me, I've tended to take lots of screenshots and slotted them in rather than referring to the textbook all the time. And I think I did that in the last session when I took a screenshot of pros and cons. But don't give up on anything. Go rooting around your maths departments have got cupboards full of textbooks, and there's always somebody that's been there for 27 years that has never cleared out all. And no, you can't throw away that Bostock and Chandler A-level textbook. Or you can't, no, you can't throw away that Blue Rainer. There's some of them are still useful, and some of them have got great resources for a variety of questions, especially when you're looking for something that you know is complete nonsense. You know you couldn't draw a pie chart from it. Get the kids thinking about why you couldn't draw a pie chart from it, or scatter graph, whatever. And then in terms of support, that's all on the slides that I think you've been sent. But come and join us over on or Vicky, who's doing a brilliant job on the statistics Facebook page. It's very friendly. We still need lots more on there just to be able to make it a proper little community. Because I genuinely think that statistics is a great qualification. We're giving them the skills to be analytical, but more importantly for me, I want them to be a little bit, it's not cynical, but I want them to be able to question statistics when they're thrown at them, make them try to validate stuff that's thrown at them as they become useful citizens. And I don't mean useful citizens, I mean as they go on to go out there in the real world. So you see there, hopefully by the end of February, loads of stuff constantly coming out now that the qualification is growing. New schemes of work. One of the things that I thought was really useful, if you haven't seen this, is that there's a thing in there that shows the crossover between GCSE and GCSE stats. So again, depends on your model, how you're delivering it. Some of you will be delivering it after school, some are delivering it as an option. Some are delivering it just the extra content after school or whenever. I'm hoping more and more will deliver it as an option, but that's quite useful to have a look at and make sure that, because there may be things you go, actually, we cover that in maths and we cover that in maths really well, so we don't need to explicitly teach it as GCSE stats. And then we've got looking at some guidance end of March, and that's the one I said about the extended answers. Hopefully have some adapted things for you to use in the classroom that maybe give kids, I'm thinking more so foundation than higher, because I think that's where there is an opportunity for us to make a difference in terms of the students' results. So just to finish off, don't forget to have a look at, if you're into your enrichment, for some of you, the stats will be classed as seen as an enrichment topic or enrichment qualification. The EMC, extended maths certificate, really interesting for your high attainers at GCSE maths to push them on beyond GCSE. Again, lovely qualification. Podcast, The Right Angle, Nick, amongst others, talking to other maths educators. And then this will then go up on the PD Academy, but there's always more and more stuff going up on the PD Academy. And if you do get feedback, an email, obviously it is important to us, so that we can make sure you're getting something. And that's me done. Unless you've got any burning questions, I will let you go. You have my permission to leave. And I always finish by saying, I hope you got, even if you only got one thing, one little golden nugget, it was worth you doing. I don't expect to change the world with these things, but I hope that people get a golden nugget. Just one that you go, oh, actually, that was quite nice. So that I might use that, or I might think, just to get you thinking.